This is Radio Free Wall Street with Lee Adler, on the web at radiofreewallstreet.fm and wallstreetexaminer.com. Hi everybody, it is June 12th, 2014, and as usual, I'm going to go behind the paper curtain of Wall Street propaganda to give you the facts. I've just completed writing an essay about the ECB's new monetary policies that it announced last week and all of the misconceptions that are flying around the media about that. On June 6th, the ECB announced that it would begin to charge interest at the rate of 10 basis points on deposits held at the central bank. The institution of the negative deposit rate has resulted in the universal misconception that this is supposed to spur banks to lend more to business by discouraging them from holding deposits at the central bank, as if this were somehow even possible, which it is not. Deposits are created when loans are made. That applies not only to central banks, but to banks in general. Banks do not need central bank money to create loans. They can create loans and money, deposits, out of thin air, subject to reserve requirements, which today are effectively zero. Loans create deposits. Deposits create reserves. The central bank is not needed in the process. What happens when a central bank lends money to banks? It creates a deposit in the bank's account at the central bank. On the one hand, the loan becomes an asset of the central bank. On the other hand, the deposit that is created becomes a liability of the central bank. The two amounts are equal. The immutable law of accounting on any balance sheet is that assets equal liabilities plus capital. In the case of the central bank, capital is essentially a fixed amount. Therefore, any increase in assets will result in an equal increase in liabilities when the central bank makes a loan to a bank. The loan is the asset, the deposit is the liability. Conversely, when a bank repays a loan, its deposit is extinguished and money disappears. A portion of the banking system's balance sheet is therefore the mirror image of the central bank's balance sheet. The banking system's cash assets, acquired as a result of loans made by the central bank, cannot be withdrawn from the central bank to make loans, nor do they need to be. The only way the banking system could withdraw those deposits would be to literally ask for truckloads of paper cash to be delivered to their own vaults. Needless to say, that's not likely to happen, short of bank runs by depositors demanding cash from them. The amounts of money on deposit at the ECB are immutable. They can be shifted from one liability category to another, such as from accounts known as current accounts to accounts known as deposit facility or fixed income deposits. The first two will now charge 10 basis points to the holder. The fixed term deposits, which the ECB offers regularly, still pay a nominal interest rate. So there will be increased demand for those as banks try to reduce their costs. But other than withdrawing paper cash, the banks can only reduce their deposits at the ECB one way. That's to pay back the loans that created the deposits. With the ECB now charging interest on deposits, lo and behold, this week, that's exactly what happened. The ECB's balance sheet shrank by $25 billion in the week ended June 6th. That's exactly the opposite of the ECB's intent, but it was entirely predictable. The ECB knew that could happen, so simultaneously with announcing charging 10 basis points interest on deposits, it also reduced the interest rate on its weekly main refinancing operations, known as MROs, by 10 basis points. The result is an absolute wash in the banking system's cost of funds over time, as the new MROs at the lower rate replace outstanding MROs at the higher rate. The banking system's cost on funds obtained from the ECB equal the interest cost of the borrowed funds less any interest paid on the deposits created, or plus any interest charged on those deposits. The old loan interest rate was 25 basis points, and the resulting deposit at the central bank paid zero. The net cost to the banking system was therefore 25 basis points. If the loan cost is now reduced to 15 basis points and the deposit rate is increased to 10 basis points, the cost to the banking system is calculated. The interest on the loan, 15 basis points, plus the deposit cost, 10 basis points, is 25 basis points. In other words, exactly the same. There's no difference in the cost of the loans before the new policy and with the new policy. There's no incentive for the banks to do anything different. And in fact, even if the cost were 10 times as much, it could not encourage banks to make more loans. Banks, remember, can create loans at will. They do not need central bank money to create loans. The issue is not the lack of willingness or ability of the banking system to make loans. The issue is the lack of qualified demand. There are times when banks go insane and make loans to unqualified borrowers. We've just been through one of those periods. Chastened by the resulting collapse, most banks, in the interest of self-preservation, have only been interested in making loans to qualified borrowers. What's lacking today is qualified borrowers. Effective loan demand is weak, and there's nothing the ECB can do about that. The Fed knows that. So instead of voluntary lending programs, it resorts to outright securities purchases to inject funds into the system. While the ECB's balance sheet keeps shrinking, the Fed, by forcing primary dealers to sell securities to it, keeps growing its balance sheet and keeps forcing cash into the system. Since economic loan demand is far less than the amount of cash the Fed is forcing into the system, its actions only cause bubbles. The ECB can't do that because it does not have a captive dealer system to force funds into the system. It also does not purchase government securities except on a limited and tortured basis to get around its own rules. To counter that problem, it is now making plans to purchase asset-backed securities. The ostensible purpose of that is to stimulate bank lending to businesses. But that can't work without qualified borrowers for the banks to lend to. What it will do is further stimulate the worldwide asset bubble as the ECB buys more asset-backed securities than the banks can replace with new lending. It would appear that the ECB is either stupid or insane if it believes these measures will work. But the ECB is neither stupid nor insane. These new policies are just a bluff, a con, an attempt to get the market to believe some kind of fantasy in the vain, stupid, and foolish hope that it will somehow stimulate the European economy. My guess is that it won't work. Meanwhile, in other news, the Treasury sold $16 billion in net new paper this week. $14 billion in short-term bills was paid down, and that cash went back to the holders of the bills, and that probably helped with the absorption or the sale of the 30-year bond on Thursday. Then on Monday, $30 billion in net new coupon issues will settle. But simultaneously on Friday, the Fed starts its June round of MBS purchase settlements, and that's going to be a total of $33.7 billion, of which $22 billion will settle on Friday and the rest next week. So the Fed is actually purchasing more paper than the Treasury is issuing, which means that there's going to be a lot of excess cash sloshing around. Watch the reverse repos for clues on any cash buildup. A lot of times at these mid-month MBS settlements, the dealers will play a little game, sell the market off for a few days around the time they're getting all that cash from the Fed, and then they turn around and pick off the low-hanging fruit before they're going to run the prices of the stocks back up again. So watch for that action next week. The technical picture is mixed. Short-term cycles are in down phases. The 13-week cycle is probably topped out, but the two longer intermediate cycles, the 6-month and 10-12-month cycle, are both in up phases, and therefore we look for some cross currents to develop here over the next few weeks. But I think we're going to get a little more consolidation, possibly a little more of a pullback. But I would expect at least a minor new high later this summer. So that'll do it for this week. Till I see you again, trade sane, and I'll see you next week. This has been Radio Free Wall Street with Lee Adler. Find this program on the web at radiofreewallstreet.fm or wallstreetexaminer.com.